Hi, I'm Martin, and this is Change from the Centre. So, one of the mistakes that Keir Starmer made in the run up to becoming Prime Minister was that he didn't sell a vision or a strategy to the country. He was all too willing to rely on the fact that people voted Labour because they weren't the Conservatives. And it meant that when things got difficult for him very, very quickly, and he became unpopular very, very quickly. So we've got a new Prime Minister coming in next week, Andy Burnham, and he is starting to set out some sort of vision for what he wants to do for the country. Here's a little bit of a quote from one of the speeches he's given in the last few weeks.
The change will be the biggest change in our lifetimes to the way the country is run, and it is consistent with the 2024 manifesto. We will create a more streamlined state with a clearer purpose to power up all parts of the country and put a laser-like focus on growth and regeneration, good growth.
So one of the things we hear a lot from the media when we get a new Prime Minister is this thing about a first 100 days. But it's become pretty clear over recent years and the many Prime Ministers we've had that Andy Burnham is not going to get 100 days. So my view is that he needs to do something very clear within his first 30 days where he articulates basically a 10-year vision for the country, looking at short-term, medium-term and long-term goals. I think there'll be a lot of benefits to this. Two in particular. When things get going and things get tough with the electorate, they will have something that they can see looking forwards. They can see where they're likely to be in 3 years' time when a general election is called. But also, they've got something as a hook to say, actually, it gets better beyond that as well. And it's very similar with the second reason, which is about backbenchers, where when it gets tough with the backbenchers, they've got a reference point as well. And I think one of the things that Andy Burnham is going to be very clear about with the backbenchers is he is not going to cave in. He has a vision and he is going to deliver. And when they react in the way they did with Keir Starmer, which was one of his biggest problems, he is going to plough on regardless. And so that they understand that by rebelling, they actually harm their own futures and their own electoral potential in a way that they didn't with Keir Starmer. The other two things he's got to look at in particular and make a priority, in my view, are electoral reform in particular and constitutional reform, but also about spend to save. I'll talk about this more later on, but spend to save projects in the UK, there's so many we can do within government where we can change the way we work. But with constitutional change, Andy Burnham has already talked about two aspects of it. He's already talked about devolution. He's already talked about proportional representation. But actually, it's about far more than that. A more balanced system would mean democratic renewal. That does mean, yes, proportional representation, a written constitution, which I've talked about a number of times, but also checks and balances that don't involve Parliament overseeing Parliament and regulating itself. Maybe updates to the monarchy because of the changes to PR, because of the changes to proportional representation. But in my view, monarchy should still be at the heart of it. Yes, a reformed second chamber, but a reformed second chamber that looks at not just Westminster itself, but we need to look at how that relates to local government. And in my view, revised and changed local government review that's going on now. It's become clear that it's a bit of a botch job and it is going to have to be revisited. So why not revisit it in the context of what should local government look like? Maybe look at regional government, which is something that I would really, really like to do. One of the things I think Andy Burnham needs to do that previous governments certainly in recent years, have completely failed to do is manage expectations. I got really, really frustrated with Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer during COVID, where he was throwing money out willy-nilly without properly explaining that that was money and that was debt that was going to have to be paid back at a later date. And it made life really, really difficult for him after COVID as Chancellor, but also as Prime Minister. So I think he needs to do that. And part of it is to say, yes, I want devolution, but devolution is not going to happen instantly. Yes, I want constitutional change. It's a 10-year program to get to where we need to be. And start talking about that. But certainly within the first year, he needs to have started to deliver on some of this stuff. But he also needs to have got to a point where he has clarity around what he is going to do. So some of the short-term things I think he should talk about within that first 12 months, he needs to publish a clear, detailed 10-year vision for Britain, as detailed as it can be. We live in a changing world, and the world is going to change significantly in the next 10 years. But we should always be looking at least 10 years ahead. Some of the infrastructure stuff we need to do is probably going to take longer than 10 years. He needs to plan constitutional reform, including letting people know what a new political system would look like, so that they again have a reference point and an expectation. He should launch what I've called a national infrastructure review. Call it whatever you like, it doesn't matter, does it? The main thing is that this is a review that looks at why is it that we fail so badly at delivering infrastructure in this country. And I've talked about this in other videos, but you look at HS2 and what a disaster of a project it is. And although there are some projects that are good, there are many, many others that are very, very similar, where they run over budget, where they run over time. And there's a reality to this and a benefit to getting this right that I want that comes in basically in the 10 years time. And we also need to be clear about, I've talked about this spend to save. He needs to identify and prioritize the areas where he's going to look at spend to save. So one of the things we are dreadful at in this country is in spending money to prevent problems. We are really, really good at spending money further down the road when the problem is there. There's a great example in the recent review that was published about youth unemployment, where they were talking about the fact that they spend far, far less upstream actually preventing unemployment in younger people than they do further downstream when they're paying benefits. And we do need to reduce our benefit budget. There's no two ways about that. And there's some areas of the benefit budget, such as pensions, where at the moment we simply cannot reduce it, and nor should we. So there are other areas, the prison system, where we're putting people into prison and making them criminals for life, when arguably we should be not putting people in prisons for sentences of less than 3 or 6 months, and instead investing that money upstream to prevent problem people becoming criminals, and instead turning them into productive members of society. All good things that, in my view, a good Prime Minister should be doing. So the things I'm talking about in this video are things that are at the core of what Change from the Centre believes. And part of that is about government setting out visions as well. But the issues underneath that, constitutional change, spend to save, all things that are really important to Change from the Centre and what we're about. I'm sure you've got ideas that you think, well, why isn't he talking about that? Why isn't he talking about this? I've put a question in the comments. What else do you think Andy Burnham should prioritise as the new Prime Minister? So let me know what you think. And it's worth me knowing those things because I can actually explore them a little bit. There are two in particular that are really important. All of this should be underpinned by a solid economy. absolutely 100%. But the other thing is defence spending, where we cannot afford to be in the position where we are now, and we do have to progress. And Andy Burnham has committed to that, to be fair. But let me know what you think in your comments. And another quick reminder, please consider liking and subscribing, because those things help me move this channel forwards. Thank you very much. So a lot of people, when they talk about medium term, they talk about 3 to 5 years. I've talked about 3 years in this video for one important reason. That arguably is the most important point in all of this process for Andy Burnham, because that's when we are at general election point. Now, of course, because of the constitution that we have, Andy Burnham could call a general election at any time, but I've used 3 years in this point because that's the point at which he's got to have one. That's the point at which people will be looking at Andy Burnham and going, yes, Labour have got a future, or no, we want somebody else. And that somebody else is what worries me, because if Labour don't get this right, the Conservatives need to have made a significant difference. Otherwise, we might be looking at something more extreme. Burnham has already said that he is going to be looking at this point to a detailed review of proportional representation, so that we can move into the next election with PR as part of their manifesto commitment. But there are a number of other things that he needs to have achieved at this point. I think he probably needs to have achieved a bit more than this in some ways. There are other things that are short-term projects that he needs to have focused on as well. He has got to have achieved growth by now, but I've said growth underpins all of this. But he needs to have started making progress on major infrastructure projects. Maybe there's some of this he could do quickly, but I doubt it. He needs to have completed phase 1 of devolution, and that includes making sure that powers have been transferred elsewhere. I suspect that this is going to be a crunch point for Labour, because local government is going to, with the local government restructuring that's coming on, or reorganisation, whatever you want to call it, it's called LGR, that's coming on stream. I think it's going to struggle, because I don't think it's going to be enabled to do things differently. Some of the areas with mayoral combined authorities certainly will be able to do more and will be chomping at the bits to get more. And so they should, because most of our mayors are actually pretty good. He needs to have done more on political restructuring by that point. And as I said, ready for Labour's manifesto. That's about all sorts of restructuring, but obviously includes an idea of exactly what proportional representation is going to mean, but also how it fits into the bigger picture, because that is really important. PR on its own does not solve our problems. And one of the issues is that if we just move ahead with PR and it doesn't succeed because the rest of politics doesn't change, there's going to be a very, very quick move to about turn that back to first past the post. It'll be a mistake, but it will be a political opportunity for somebody. The other thing he needs to have done is prioritise spend to save projects and started to implement them, but also to set out the savings that are going to come from spend to save and what he's going to do with them. And I talked about the prison system. If you can get a system where you're stopping people going to prison and you can make them productive members of society, you'll save a huge amount of money, and you might be able to push that upstream to actually identify people before they even start going along the road where they need to go into some sort of rehabilitation. So those are sort of my priorities for the medium term. As I said, it's not perfect, not by any means, and none of this is, because things are going to change between now and then. He is going to have to deliver on more policy ideas and policy thoughts from this. But this should be his underlying theme, in my opinion, talking about a 10-year programme to rejuvenate the whole of Britain. I actually think it's not just for him to do this. I think the Conservative Party should be doing the same thing as well. I think the Conservative Party need to start setting out a 10-year plan, because unless they do, people are just still going to be associating them with the Conservatives of the past. And I do think Kemi Badenoch is much better than that. And by the way, she showed it today in Prime Minister's Questions, Keir Starmer's last PMQs, when she was very, very gracious to him and showed a much softer side of her, which she needs to show more often. Obviously, naturally, I'm now going to start talking about long term. And can you imagine a point where in 10 years' time, Andy Burnham is still in power because people believe that he's done the job that he promised them and that he's delivered for Britain? It would be phenomenal, not least because I'm pretty sure Britain would be in a better place. And I mean Britain as a whole, because one of the things Andy Burnham is focused on is moving power and moving the delivery of infrastructure so it focuses more on other parts of the country rather than just focused on the southeast. He's talked about it a number of times in his speeches, and he's quite right to do it. We have a system at the moment that funds success quite rightly, but what it doesn't do is fund potential, because it's geared up just to fund areas that are already successful. And it's part of the reason, one of the things I talk about in this podcast is you could take a map of deprivation 30 years ago and stick it against a map of deprivation today and not see much difference. And we have to start dealing with that. So here's my view of what 10 years might look like. So a new restructured British politics that people see as fairer and better balanced. And public services are prioritizing prevention. This includes the health service, where we're trying to stop people becoming ill rather than treating people when they become ill. That's obviously not perfect, never going to be delivered perfect. We should have, as a country, a growing international reputation for infrastructure. Can you imagine that compared to where we are now, where other countries are looking at us and saying, how are we doing that? This is really important, because the businesses that are delivering our infrastructure, especially if we can create British businesses that do that, they would then be able to sell their services abroad, and that would do even better for our economy. And the final thing, and this is the most important thing to a certain extent, is we'd have revived public confidence in politics. We have one of the most unpopular political systems in the world amongst our own electorate. So what I mean by that is British politics is really, really seen unfavorably by British people in the way that, as an example, German people do not see the German system as unpopular. So those are all sort of the things he should be looking at, creating a new, rejuvenated, confident Britain. And it is my view that the only way that he can do that is by looking at long term, and in particular finding ways of fixing a broken system, but also about delivering long-term infrastructure, because we do have an abysmal record of delivering infrastructure. Not only have we not done enough, but it's cost too much. So infrastructure, in terms of growing our economy and setting our economy ready for the 50 years that follow the next 10, is really important. I did some work when I was a counsellor with the University of Cambridge, and it astonishes me that the University of Cambridge are sort of looking 40, 50 years ahead on some of the things they're doing. And yet we've got a government that isn't enabled at this precise moment to look more than 2-3 years ahead. And that short-termism is harming us. And it's a short-termism that is contributing to our political system breaking down. I hope you've enjoyed what I've said here today. It's only my ideas, not perfect ideas, just my own thoughts, just to stimulate a bit of debate and provide maybe a little bit of thought leadership. It's you to decide whether that's happened. But thanks very much for letting me talk, and thank you very much for listening to me.